Hey everyone, this is Mason Hutchison, and you're listening to Herb Rally, your daily herbal podcast. We come out with new episodes about 5 days a week, so be sure to tune in often. Our goal for the show is to help you along your herbalist journey, no matter what stage you're at. We have over 704 episodes, so feel free to peruse those episodes, and you're bound to find something of interest. Really excited to share this episode with you all today, and it is another edition of the Herbalist Hour. And in this one, I'm joined by Rosemary Gladstar. So Rosemary's been an incredible inspiration to me along my herbal journey, as I'm sure she's likely have been for you as well. So I felt incredibly honored to have her on the show. In this conversation, we chat about cooperation versus competition in the herbal community, honoring your elders, her new podcast, the origins of the Breitenbush Herbal Conference, advice for living a good life, and a whole lot more. So Rosemary gave one of the keynotes along with Lucretia Van Dyke at this year's Great Lakes Herb Faire, and that was just a couple weeks ago. And so we were able to hang out at the Great Lakes Herb Faire, and that is exactly where this interview was recorded. So we recorded an in-person video. So if you want like any of the visuals that go along with this episode, you could always check those out on our YouTube channel. Just simply search Herb Rally in the search bar. Should pop right up. So there's a lot of takeaways in this episode. I know you're going to love it. If you'd like to hear more from Rosemary, we talk about it quite a bit in this podcast episode, but she actually has a new podcast of her own. It's called Voices of Our Herbal Elders. So whatever podcast player you're using to listen to this show, simply search Voices of Our Herbal Elders, and please subscribe. We listened to the first episode on our drive to the Great Lakes Herb Faire, and it was with David Winston. Absolutely amazing episode. David's a great storyteller, and I saw they just released episode 2 with our good friend Kat Meyer. So huge thanks to Rosemary for joining me on the show, and thanks to y'all for listening. Also, before we get into the show, I want to tell you about the upcoming Plant Spirit Psychopomp course, and that is with Gene Schneider from Nativa Medica. So in this rare offering, you'll explore plants, trees, and land and enter into experiential work together. You'll learn how to do this middle work and maintain personal sovereignty by being in relationship with key plants and trees. You'll discover plants that could be helpful during the death process. You'll connect with a powerful network of plants, trees, and land psychopomps who already know how to aid beings in transition. You'll learn how to care for yourself during and after you do this work, and a whole lot more. So to learn more about Nativa Medica's Plant Spirit Psychopomp course, just click on the link in the podcast show notes, and they're actually limiting registration for 20. So if this is of interest for you, definitely check it out and register soon. Also, before we get into the show, I want to tell you about an upcoming free webinar with Patricia Carizzi-Howell, friend of the Herbalist Hour. She's actually been on twice. And this webinar is called 5 Things Herbal Practitioners Should Avoid. So this is coming up on October 3rd, and it's on Zoom. And again, this is a free webinar. And here's a little bit about the description. Are you ready to use your herbal wisdom to help friends, family, and others in your community? Congratulations, we need more herbalists. This webinar explains how to recognize and avoid doing things that could sabotage your good intentions. Drawn from the lessons Patricia has learned the hard way. As she began to practice as an herbalist, these 5 suggestions are easy to implement. And if you avoid making the same mistakes that Patricia did, she guarantees you will approach your clients feeling confident and prepared. So again, this is a free webinar hosted by Patricia Carizzi-Howell. It's called 5 Things Herbal Practitioners Should Avoid, and it takes place on October 3rd, 2023 at 6 p.m. Central Time. Since Zoom links are so random with numbers and letters, I will just include a link in the podcast show notes to make it easy on you. So if that sounds of interest to you, just click on the link in the podcast show notes. And last but not least, I want to tell you that the Vitalist Herbalism mini course just released lesson 3, and it's called The Pillars of Strategic Formulation. So in this free course, you're going to learn the 5 key strategies for creating an herbal formula, the 8 things you need to know about every plant you work with, and the 3 things about a person you need to know before you give them any herbs. So this is lesson 3 of the Vitalist Herbalism mini course. The other 2 are also available, and these lessons are available for a limited time only. So as per usual, I will leave a link for the Vitalist Herbalism mini course with all 3 lessons in the podcast show notes, along with the other links that I mentioned as well. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor for the Herbalist Hour, and that is our good friends, Lise and Jeff Higley over at Oshala Farm. So if you'd like to purchase some of the finest organic herbs, simply head to oshalafarm.com. They have over 80 different medicinal plants that they sell, along with a lot of other herbal products. So thanks so much to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. That's going to do it for me today, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm honored to have on Rosemary Gladstar. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mason. I'm honored.
It's great to have you here. And, we're at the Great Lakes Herb Faire.
Yeah.
Amazing event. And we just watched you give a keynote, which Jim McDonald gave a fantastic introduction for you. And I just really wanted to kind of start things off where he was saying one of your specialties in the herbal community is the differentiation between cooperation and competition. And I just thought it was such a loving way to introduce you. And I'm just kind of curious if you can kind of speak on competition versus cooperation in the herbal community.
Wow, we're going to start off deep.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, first of all, I have to say I love Jim, right?
Yeah.
So, and everybody loves Jim. He's just, got a heart of gold.
Yes, amen.
And we all feel, I think at some levels, we have that opportunity to feel competition if we want, but it generally doesn't support us as a community. And I think the reason very early on when I would feel, because I'm like everybody else, I would feel those feelings. And, like I ran this little herb store in a very small community. And then a really good friend of mine opens up another store right down the road. Right. So I had an opportunity. This is just an example of thinking like, what the heck is she doing, right? Yeah. But instead what I did is I realized that we need these, and that we can work together to make both of us successful. And I've tried to carry that through my whole life. First of all, recognizing when I have those feelings, not pretending like I don't. Yeah. But also recognizing that that there is room, and that there is room for everything, and that when we work in the spirit of cooperation, it just means more of what's better. I think that's the key. Sure. And then also, what are the things about when there's other people doing similar things that we all love that brings us together, right? It also challenges us to do better at what we do. Yeah. So that is the other thing I'd say. It's not like trying to do better than the other person. It's trying to do better at what I do. It makes me want to do better. Totally. So when I see, these wonderful things that are going on in the herbal world, I'm really delighted and excited, and it makes me go, well, I want to keep my course really up to date. I need to rewrite it after 30 years, And again, it's not in the spirit of competition. It's just making me step up to do my best. Yeah. So I think that we just need to nourish those more positive aspects when we might feel competition, right? Yeah. To use that in a really good way to enhance what we're doing, to recognize it's a gift to the world, and it helps build community.
I love that. And the herbal community is a very loving and giving place from what I've experienced overall. And apologies for starting you with the fastball. I just know you've told your story a lot in other shows, so I really wanted to, when Jim was introducing you, I felt really compelled to ask you that. I really wanted to make sure I asked you that because, you really do have a great insight into this whole cooperation. You've built such amazing community here throughout the years, so thank you for sharing that.
Oh no, I really appreciate that, and it is a really important question because we see more and more more and more tea companies and more staff companies, and there is that feeling like how am I going to make it work, and the idea of if we're feeling competitive with each other, it has a negative connotation to it, but we can translate to be really positive, so it works better for each person, and also, as I said, it helps us do better. But I think the key is recognizing those feelings. Like with jealousy is also right. We all have jealousy, but to try to shove it or let it be negative can be very harmful for everything. But when you just look at it and go, okay, well, what is this feeling I'm having, and how do I lift it up? So it makes it really like a gift for me and a gift for the world.
I love that. I love that. I love the saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's beautiful. Kind of what I think about a lot of the time when it comes to this whole community and everything. So
You said that much better than I did. Thank you.
Oh, that's what I'm here for, Rosemary. So, appreciate that. Well, I was really excited to have you on also to promote your new show. It's called Voices of the Herbal Elders, if I'm getting that correct. We actually listened to the David Winston episode on the drive here, of course. Yeah, it was awesome. But before we get into that, during your keynote, you brought up a story that reflected why we should be honoring our elders, or at least a display of someone honoring the elders. Can you tell the Herb Rally audience the story about the rental car situation?
Yeah, it's a marvelous story. So we were just talking about, recognizing that in every community there are elders, and the ones that I was showing on my slideshow were oftentimes really well known. And those are very easy to honor. You kind of go up to them and like, oh, I love what you're doing. But it's those that are kind of forgotten, and they have incredible stories. And oftentimes they're not as willing or open to telling them, so you have to entice them out. And it can be just a wonderful conversation that happens. So this story is a little bit like that.
Yes.
So we had traveled all day since about 6:30 in the morning to get here because of delays and big storms. And when we finally get to Detroit, it's around 9 now. So we've been on the road since 6:30 in the morning. And there's like at least a 2-hour, I'm not exaggerating, wait to get to the rental cars. And so Helen was in there. So I was outside, and there was this 95-year-old man who was a little blind and a little deaf. And he had a twinkle in those eyes that couldn't see out, but his eyes were still twinkling to the world, right? So I was engaged in this wonderful conversation with him, just having such a good time. In the meantime, my blessed Helen is my dear friend. She's standing in that line, and she tells me this story. It's going like molasses, right? And there's a younger man. He's maybe in his 40s, maybe 45. He's in the military, by the way, and he's almost up to the front of the line. And he happens to glance back, and way at the back is this really elderly woman. Without a fuss, without making any to-do, he excuses himself, he walks up and gets this elderly woman and brings her up to his spot, and then walks back to that place in the back of the line. He's not trying to call any attention. Everybody sees it, and they give him an enormous round of applause. And I think at that moment, everybody there wishes, why hadn't they thought of that, right? And then people there in kindness said, but you can come up and stand where you were. He said, no, I don't need to. Yeah. And that's the kind of respect I think what we need to have for these people who have had the courage and, to continue to be here on this earth, really, and that we need to honor them. We don't do that very much in our communities at all. So in the herbal community, I think we do it really beautifully.
Absolutely.
But I think overall what we see happens with older people is they get oftentimes shipped off to rest homes.
Sure. Yeah, what a beautiful illustration right before you show up to the herb conference where this is going to be the thesis of your keynote.
Yeah.
What a wonderful story. So why don't you tell us about, well, actually, will you do this with me? Maybe we could do like a little mini version of Voices of Our Herbal Elders, and you could maybe tell us a little bit about a couple of the different, maybe people that have influenced you. I would really like to hear about Juliet de Berkeley Levy.
Oh, yes.
If I got that correct.
Would
you mind spending a few minutes talking about how she was important in your life and your herbal journey in general?
Oh, would I mind? I think so. A little time? Oh, my God. So just cut me off when you need to.
Because you did a beautiful slideshow up there, and I was like, oh, every single person. I was like, you're right. You could probably talk about every one of them for an hour.
Yes, because all of those people I do personally, right? So and their lives and who they are in the world or were, touched me and influenced me deeply, and I think absolutely helped me be a better person. Yeah. So Juliet, how I found out about Juliet was in the very maybe early 1970s, and there were hardly any herb books out. No classes, no schools or anything at that time. There were a few elders who were speaking. Juliet was not from this country. She actually was of Turkish Egyptian descent. And she grew up in an extremely wealthy family in England. So right from the beginning, this woman was kind of extraordinary, right? Like kind of eccentric even, because all those factors didn't really make sense. But I was in the library in Santa Rosa, California, where I grew up, and looking for herb books, right? And I happened to find a Traveler's Joy and a Gypsy in New York. Now, these weren't really quote-unquote herb books. They were just more stories of her life. Mm-hmm. But so she had this ability for not just me, but for thousands of people who read her work. She just pulled you in. I was pulled in. It was like I was pulled into a world that struck chords in me, right? And I absolutely fell in love with this woman through those 2 books. And I wrote a long, long love letter. I'm this, I didn't call myself an herbalist at that time. I'm in love with plants and da-da-da-da. And I wrote this letter and I sent it to her publisher in England, Keats Publication. I never expected to hear back, but she wrote me a letter. And so we corresponded actually for a few years. And then I was in my late 20s. I remember this moment. I'm standing in the parking lot talking to one of my teachers and dear friends, Dr. Swavo Brooks, who was also...
Eugenian.
Yes, yes, I love this man. Yeah. And literally, I loved him. And we both had this deep love of Juliet. So I'm sitting there saying to him, we need to get over and meet her before she dies of old age, right? At that time, she was probably younger than I am now. And she went on to live for another almost 40 years, right? But old woman, right? So I actually organized a trip. It was really one of my first or second international plant lovers trips to go visit this woman who lived at that time she was living on an island. It was not a popular island, it was called Kithera, and it had like a dirt landing strip. She lived way out at the end of the island in a little stone hut by the Adriatic Sea. No electricity, no running water, it was just, anyway, and so I sent her a letter and we made arrangements, so we were gonna come, and then I never heard from her. And I had like 30 people signed up to go on this trip. Wow. Because we were all in love with Juliet by this time. And I never hear from her. I don't even know if she's going to be home when we show up with 30 people. My mother came with me on this trip too. Finally, I do hear from her 2 weeks before we're scheduled to be there. She said, I was just in Scotland visiting my son. And so we flew and we met her, and it was life-changing for all of us. And there's much more incredible stories about this, but the big thing that happened on that trip was that I decided I wanted to bring her to the United States. And that took about another 10 years, but I was able to bring her to the International Herb Symposium. And do I have a moment to just tell the story?
Please, absolutely.
Yeah, because it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring her not only because I knew that it would get a lot of people to come to the conference,
Sure.
but I just knew that so many people had been raised on her books, had raised their children on her books, and also had raised their animals. So it would be just such an honor for them to meet her. But more even than that is I wanted her to see the influence that she'd had. She had no clue. And she was living kind of alone, without any recognition, kind of, I would say this, like an old woman who didn't have anything else left going on. She was not healthy or anything. Yeah. So I wanted to bring her back. And bringing her to the United States changed her life as well as ours. But, so it was the same thing. I got it all arranged. She wanted to get her own ticket. Okay, great. And now it's 2 weeks before the International. We had over 800 people signed up to come because they wanted to meet her. Sure. And I'm going, I haven't seen her ticket come through. She wanted to get her own ticket. We were, of course, going to pay for it. So I call her. So no cell phones. And of course, Juliet doesn't have a phone. So it's calling the local travel agent who goes and gets Tarzan, really his name, the local Greek driver, to drive all the way out, 30 miles out this dirt road to get Juliet and bring her to a payphone. Juliet, I say, I'm really excited. We have all these people coming to meet you. She says to me in her deeply Cockney, I wish I could quote her. I wish I could use her voice, because deeply Cockney accent, like, Rosemary, dear, not to worry. I've decided not to come, but I've made some tapes for you. Like, these were cassette tapes, right, that I could put on. And I'm horrified. Juliet, pack your bags. I'm coming to get you. So 2 weeks before the International, I'm flying to Greece to get Juliet and get her packed up, get her to the airport. We're in the airline getting ready to load on the plane, and they're looking at her passport going, dear, your passport isn't in order. So then I had to go back to Athens and hook around that town, that city, and we flew in. Finally, I got her passports all figured out and in order, and we flew in, I think it was the morning or the day before the International. Wow. But it was, first of all, it makes a great story. Sure. Second of all, it was absolutely worth it, because I really think it gave her like another 20 years of life, and she was really able to see the impact her work had had, not only on us as herbalists, but also the entire natural pet rearing community, because we love her work, but she's far more well known in the animal world for her. She was a tremendous advocate for animals.
What did she say about humans who wanted to read something about her book?
Yeah, so all of her early herb books, she was a very prolific writer.
Yeah.
She liked to refer to herself, quote unquote, as a gypsy scholar, right?
Yes.
And all of her early herb books were written for animals, like the Complete Herbal Handbook for Farm and Stable, the Complete Herbal Handbook for the dog. She wrote one for cats. You know, that was her main passion. And everybody was begging her to write her books for people. And she would really just literally say, you can use the animal books. You can just use what's in the animal
exactly.
books. So she loved animals more than she loved people, right?
Amanda might be in the same boat.
Yeah, she tolerated us.
Sure, exactly. What an amazing human. Yeah.
She was a great character, I have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you told stories of a lot of different herbalists during your keynote, and your first episode was with David Winston, who I know is another one of the herbal elders. Sorry, there's a bug in my face here. Would you like to speak a little bit maybe about something you learned from David Winston, or maybe a story that he shared during the first episode of the podcast?
Yeah. Well, you know, we chose David to start with.
Yeah.
First of all, he's so articulate.
Yeah.
And he's a great storyteller.
Great storyteller.
And a brilliant herbalist. So it was a good start. But, you know, so I met David when he was a young man, maybe in his mid or early 30s. And we were hosting the International Herb Symposium on the West Coast.
Yeah.
So, no, excuse me, we were hosting the Breitenbush Herbal Conference on, so we'd been hosting events on the West Coast since really about 1978.
Mm-hmm.
But that one really stuck, and people remembered that one. First of all, it was at Breitenbush, right, which is holy, sacred ground.
Absolutely.
There were hot springs. It was beautiful. We were in the mountains. So there was something about that, you know, just the place, the location filled our hearts. But it was also, I think, the first time that we started looking outside the West Coast and inviting people to come in. So when David first came, he came as a participant. He'd heard that there was an event on the West Coast, and he came all the way out. He was living in New Jersey at that time. And literally for him, it was for many people when they'd come to those early conferences, there's other people who are like I am. It was like finding a tribe, really finding a family.
Yeah.
And he was, he was pretty astounded. And I remember him, like he would come up, he was so eager, and he really like wanted to teach it. I didn't know who he was at all, but I could feel his energy, right? And he'd been studying with some native elders, and he was actually leading sacred ceremonies, and he was telling me about that. So, you know, I didn't want to just invite him to come and teach because I really didn't know him. I could feel he had a lot of good energy, right?
Yeah.
So I invited him to come and lead the ceremonies, and he eagerly did that. And then, of course, right away I could see, you know, that this man really knew a lot. Even as a young man, he was very wise. He was very diligent in his studies, and he was working very hard in the elder communities, learning from them. So, you know, yeah, his brilliance shone. So I think, really, literally, I think David has come to almost every single international conference, and he came to every Breitenbush conference after that. And it was beautiful to watch him, you know, grow into being this amazing leader in the herbal community. So, yeah.
Yeah, he really is an amazing storyteller. Every story he was telling during that first episode, I could just see the whole scene. It was really. It sounded like he actually ended up teaching a TCM class at that first event.
That's right. Because somebody
backed out or something.
Somebody wasn't able to show up.
Yeah.
They got sick or whatever.
Yeah.
So he comes up and he's like, "I can teach that." You know, it's like, okay, go teach it then. Yeah. He had a lot of confidence, but. It was more, I think he was so wanting to, you know, to do this. I think he was pushing through his insecurities, you know, because of that desire to really want to share and teach and also be recognized. Because at that time, you know, we were small circles, you know, so I think it was a combination. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Sure. Well, I just heard the episode, so. Well, I want to encourage you, go subscribe to Voices of Our Herbal Elders on your podcast player of choice. Thanks for sharing. That was awesome. I kind of want to stay in memory lane a little bit because I've always wanted to ask you this. As you may know, I don't know if you remember or not, but I organized 1 year of the Breitenbush Herbal Conference.
Oh, I do remember.
Yeah. And
you did awesome.
Thank you so much. So I was always been curious from your perspective, the early days of Breitenbush, how it formed and just what it was like in general. If you want to kind of go down memory lane with me.
My goodness. Could I tell you the story? Because really the very first time I went to Breitenbush, It wasn't even open to the public. It
Oh,
was
really?
no, it was just a few people who were living there. And how we found it, how quote unquote found it was our very first plant lovers journey on our school bus. And I had this dream of taking herb school on the road, right? And just driving everywhere in the world that we could possibly drive. And we ended up pretty much doing that. And learning from the elders and learning from local plant lovers, but also sharing, my real dream was I wanted to do it on horseback, with a cart behind, but we ended up buying this incredible school bus that drove for 30 years and took people on these trips. And our first trip was to go up the coast and end up in Canada on Vancouver Island, where Jim and Mindy Green were living at the time, and Norma Myers. So we drove up there and had this wonderful conference. So that was our goal. We got there. We were on the road for it was almost two months. It was a long trip.
Wow.
You have to remember, this is way back when people could actually take off, and these were herb school students, right? So there was about 30 of us on that little tiny bus. They ranged in age from Shawnee, who was 3 months old, to Grandpa Roberts, who was in his 70s at that time. So anyway, the thing that happened on that trip was it was spring when we started. Turned out to be a very rainy spring in the Pacific Northwest.
Sure.
So
I know those.
which means basically it rained every day and rained really, really hard. And so what do a bunch of young people who are herbalists do? Well, we go walking in the rain and we have a wonderful time. We're all camping out every night. But we also searched out hot springs everywhere we went. So that's where we would go to get warm and hang up our clothes and kind of come out of all the mildew. Yeah. And we kept hearing about this place called Breitenbush, right, all along the way. So we made it up to Canada. And before I tell the little Breitenbush part, I should say our first stop was at Nikki Scully's in Eugene, Oregon.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And she was hosting our group coming through, right? And Nikki Scully, for those of you who don't know, she was married to Rock Scully, who was the original manager for the Grateful Dead.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if there's a tie there.
Yes, definitely a tie.
Okay.
And so Nikki wanted to sponsor us, and she wanted to have a big party as we came through. So she invited Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. And Ken at that time had his big psychedelic bus, and we had our little very proper yellow school bus. I didn't want to paint it. I wanted it to be and it was beautiful. And he was standing in the parking lot with me looking at our bus, because when we went to the party, he said, "Let's go check your bus out." So Ken Kesey's standing there and he goes, "You will never make it." Meaning he meant, how can we have so many people in this little school bus and think we're going to get along and have fun? And I looked at him and I said, "You don't know herbalists." And we had such an incredible time. We sang every night. We'd make campfires and sing around the campfires and cook our own food. We had a little kitchen trailer called Out of the Blue that we pulled along because it was a blue trailer. So anyway, it was on our way back. Yeah. And we stopped at Breitenbush. And they had that big pool filled with hot water at that time, even though they weren't supposed to let people. We actually, for the first and only time, we got to swim in that huge pool with the water. And I just fell in love with this place. Yeah. And I said, we need to bring all the herbalists back here. So the very next year, we had the very first Breitenbush Hot Springs Herbal Conference. And it was one of their first events, because, as I said, they weren't even really open to the public. It had been bought by a young visionary man. Do you know this story?
No.
Yeah, by a young visionary man whose money, he came from wealth. His parents had oil money, right? Yeah. And he wanted to do something really good with it. So he bought this place with the intention that he would help to create a community, and then the community would run it. So he didn't buy it to own it. Wow. He bought it to give it back. Wow. And so and those early people that were there were all very committed to creating a really heartful community, and they created this incredible place. It's been 40 years now. Yeah. I mean, maybe even longer.
Yeah. And
wow.
Yeah, I know. Time flies, right? And I just got to say, I haven't been back since a lot of the forest fires have happened, that's totally devastating. I hope that they're rebuilding, because what a magical place. But yeah, it was an honor to be a part of that lineage. And I always tell people that it was like the first herb conference. I don't know if that's actually true. So do you know if that's like the first like official herb conference?
No, we actually had many conferences in California, and they were
really okay.
And they were large. Like we'd have 300 or 400 people that would come. Yeah. But the reason that the Breitenbush, I think, made that kind of first it was at Breitenbush.
Yeah.
Breitenbush was sacred ground, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it was so fun when you got there. You know, like you'd go. There was incredible teachers and incredible classes, and then you could go just soak in these holy sacred waters. And it was the first time that we actually started bringing teachers from outside the Pacific Northwest. So I think that's partly why. Also, it may have been, that was back in the 1980s by the time we hosted that. Yeah. And herbalism, the bells were beginning to ring louder and louder, right? So we were seeing more and more people. So I think that may have been a possible reason as well. Okay.
And you said Grandpa Roberts. Now, was that the guy that loved being around all the naked people? Okay. So he loved the Breitenbush Herbal Conference.
He loved any hot springs. Yeah, Grandpa was there, hugging trees and hugging those young girls.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Was it also, I want to say I heard it was the birthplace of like the American Herbalist Guild, or maybe it's the United Plant Savers that I'm thinking of.
Well, again, really not the birthplace. The first meeting of the American Herbalist Guild happened at, I think it was Christopher Hobbs in Santa Cruz, California.
Okay.
And it was we did meet at Breitenbush in one of our early board meetings for United Plant Savers. Gotcha. It was with those early board meetings, because we had to work so hard and all of us were traveling a distance to come together, was all our own pocket money, right?
Yeah.
So we always tried to make those board meetings happen in really beautiful places. Like we met in Hawaii, we met in Breitenbush, and we met at the beautiful sanctuary that UPS ended up purchasing. So that we would have, 2 days of in-person meetings, but then we'd have 2 days of like soaking in hot springs or, hiking to volcanoes and stuff. So we really, those early, maybe the first 5, 6, 7 years of those board meetings were unlike any board meeting that I've ever, they were not bored. Right. They were really, really fun and juicy. And they awesome. Really, I think, created the foundation for that organization. Yeah. And they made the work totally worthwhile.
That's amazing. Just a quick break from the show to thank our presenting sponsor, Oshala Farm. Oshala Farm is a beautiful and vibrant certified organic herb farm based in Southern Oregon, where they grow and sell over 80 different plant species. The founders, Elise and Jeff Higley, have been longtime friends, so I highly trust their growing methods and ethics. You'll love the potency and vibrancy of all the herbs they have to offer. To learn more and purchase their herbs and other organic goods, head to oshalafarm.com. So thanks once again to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. Now back to the show. Enjoy. Well, I just want to switch gears a little bit. We've been trying out this new segment. It's called Explain That Gram. And basically, this is going to be you explaining an Instagram post. I don't even know if you manage your Instagram account or not, but I'm going to show you a picture, and I'm hoping you could tell the Herb Rally audience kind of the larger picture behind it. So here we go.
Should I be honest? I've never even been on Instagram.
You heard it here first. That's awesome. I kind of figured that though.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But okay, so let's post it.
It's a picture you're probably going to be familiar with. I hope so. So.
This is going to be fun.
Oops. Oh man, where is that?
Mason, did you show everybody this gorgeous?
Yeah.
Dandelion? That is so beautiful.
And we have it on record, 7 Song calling it botanically correct. So
all right. If 7 Song calls it, we know that it is. Yeah.
Totally. So do you know what's going on here? I think you're growing amaryllis or.
Oh yes.
Yeah. It's an awesome picture.
Oh my God, that looks a little too sexual, actually. But am I the only one who would look at that and think that?
I didn't think that, so you must be.
Anyway, those are. So I rescue amaryllis. Because at the end of Christmas, these beautiful, incredible bulbs that have often come from halfway around the world are just left in their boxes and. Are thrown out or sold for $1, and I can't stand it, Yeah. So I have so many amaryllis, right? My husband actually finally built me a greenhouse that I can house them in, right? At least in the, not in the winter. In the winter, of course, I bring them in. So that's me being super excited because my amaryllis are starting to come out. So every winter, and I give so many away. You know, they're my Christmas presents. I put them in nice little pots and like, this is one of my babies, because they also make babies, right? They make little bobettes around them. What are you going to do with 200 amaryllis, right? So anyway, they kind of take over our house in the winter, but it's like incredible because all through November until spring, I have amaryllis, gorgeous amaryllis blooming in the house. So that's me being super excited about this incredibly phallic thing coming out of the pot that's going to open up and be this exquisitely gorgeous flower. And they're not fussy. I mean, amaryllis are tough. You know, they're like, to me, they're like that. You know, they kind of look like they're going to be really high maintenance and like, you know, like you got to feed them special things. They're not at all. They just look gorgeous, but they are like tough. I like that kind of beauty. I call it utility, right? You know, it's beautiful and they're just
utility.
Utility.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, utility. You know, I learned that term from Cascade. It actually is from, it's an architectural term that comes like from the 1900s when people were building. Something had to be beautiful, but also it had to have utility. It had to be useful and beautiful. Utility. It's a beautiful word. We need to reclaim that word, right? Yeah.
I think we're starting to right here. I love that. That's so cool.
So what is the usefulness of a amaryllis? Because you can't eat them and they're not medicinal.
Sure.
Their usefulness is that they bring such amazing holy beauty to the whole space around them. A useful beauty, you know, they make people joyful and happy, and they're hardy and incredible. And don't ever throw your amaryllis away again.
I love that. You tell them.
I'm in fact thinking of making a special trip to Holland just to look at the giant amaryllis bulbs they grow there. Yeah.
I'm glad I asked. I had no idea. I just thought it was a funny picture.
It is kind of a funny picture. I don't know. I don't have.
Is that your greenhouse in it? Is that where you're? No. Okay.
No, it's just probably in the house. I'm not sure why those colors are that way.
Yeah, it might just be my phone. I'm colorblind, so maybe I have a weird setting.
It's purple. The whole thing.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Look at that. That's and then what do I have on my head? Like a crown and.
You look like a mad scientist or something.
I know what that is. So Robert has. Oh, those are the amaryllis. But why it's purple is because he has a little green. He built a little grow room in our house, right? Before marijuana was legal, right?
Sure.
So he could grow his, and so it has these reflective walls, and the grow lights are that color. So that room, I didn't let him grow pot anymore in that room, right? It's totally overtaken by my amaryllis, and then I got so many that he had to build the greenhouse. So no more amaryllis for me. We have way too many. But that's that picture.
That's funny. And just FYI, that I did get that from your Instagram, so that's on the public forum. So just FYI. That's awesome.
I'm going to have to talk to Helen about what she posts on my Instagram.
Well, a couple more questions for you. I'm just kind of curious if you have any advice for, say, the budding herbalist who's looking to make this either a lifestyle or a career in general.
Oh, man, I would just say go for it.
Oof.
I think it's one of the most absolutely beautiful paths. And it's like for the plants themselves, it's just so beautiful and they're uplifting. And when you start to feel hopeless or depressed, you just go out in the woods and, you know, be in nature, and those plants just lift you up. I mean, they are antidepressants, right? Just by their very nature of being, because they've been in practice a long time for it. And the plants themselves have recognized that the earth goes through mighty changes, you know, and there's times when they're wiped out by fire, volcanoes, glaciers, you know, and then they come back, right? And they know their ancestors are there under the ground, lifting them up. And all of that we feed on just by breathing them in. So absolutely. And there's just so many different lifestyle, quote unquote, careers that you can make that go anywhere from growing to being a cosmetician or a florist, or where you work magic by creating beautiful bouquets that are taken to ceremonies like weddings and funerals and romance, you know, or you can be a clinical herbalist or a family herbalist, or, you know, or a doula who knows her herbs, or a death doula who knows how to help somebody pass over with just the aid of the plants. And so it's just, and you know, and the most incredible thing about stepping into this world is also the people. I have to say, it just gives me so much hope. And every time I'm in a circle, if the circle is small or large with other herbalists, and it's not that we're all, you know, have the same mindset or we all have the same belief systems, but there's just this definite desire to want to do good on this earth and to walk gently on her. And sometimes we get off trail, and we forget and we start, but there's the plants always come back, or a plant person always comes back to remind us there's a greater purpose for us here, and to just open up and, and to be kind and gentle. So for any of you who are thinking of going into this, there are so many ways to be successful in this path and to even earn right livelihood.
Yeah.
Be creative. I would say that, there's a lot of salve companies, a lot of tea companies, a lot of tincture companies. So look at what your passion is and see how you can manifest that in a unique way. So like, it's a special gift. And I'm not saying you can't start a salve company,
Sure.
but there's so many of them. So if I was starting right now, I certainly wouldn't start by making traditional medicinals or
Sure.
country comfort. I would look at, what does my community need that I am impassioned by and can be of good service to and provide? I think every community needs people who are willing to share and, teach. And teaching can frighten people because teachers feel like, if you think about teaching, you think, oh, I have to know so much. I always like to say to people, I'm a very successful teacher. And when I started teaching, I knew less than anybody in my classes do today. I didn't know anything really, but I knew a little bit more than my community, and I felt a passion for sharing. So I just think of teaching as just sharing what you know. And you can start off teaching by asking for exchange of vegetables or, eggs. And as you get better at it, then you can, ask for you can have a little basket and ask for change, So it can be not a frightful thing, but every community, every neighborhood needs people who are willing to do herb walks and to teach and share. Yeah.
Such a good answer. I love that. Yeah. Thank you.
Mason.
Yeah. If you're willing to share more advice, this is kind of a selfish question. If I were to ask you, can you give advice on living just a good life? Like, you're such a joyful person. You've accomplished so much, which some might think you might be like, I don't think you consider yourself like a type A type person or whatever, but you've accomplished a lot, but you balance it with such humility and kindness and love. And I'm just kind of curious, like, if you were to say, give me advice or the audience advice, how do you live a joyful, good life? Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I will try to share something that maybe is helpful. But I did think of something that I wanted to share just about that humbleness that a lot of herbalists exhibit, and it's because we bow always to the earth. Like, you're always leaning down. We do reach up too to the heavens, but the whole act, the symbolism of reaching down, is of service. You're reaching down to harvest, to pick, to create medicines, to serve your family and your community and others. So there is a certain, if you really are paying attention to what your body is doing as you kneel to the earth, it is a very humbling, and it's also humbling to feel that the plants are working through you, that you've actually been called to do this, so there's that. But I want to say that practicing joy and how to live a joyful life, it's a practice, I've had so much sorrow in my life these last 3 years, and I've had the opportunity to use the tools that I've been trying to cultivate my whole life, right? So it's a practice. I don't think, I had a good teacher. My mother was a fabulous teacher. She was a joyful, loving, kind person, and her life was also extremely hard. She was a survivor of the Armenian genocide, so not easy beginning for my mom. But she was really, truly one of the most delightful, funny, loving human beings. So I had a good teacher of how to do that. But it's a practice. You put into practice, like, you greet the day. You greet it with joy. You think about what makes you feel happy, and you try to put that out to others. I would say for most people, not all people, but for most people, we are able to practice joyfulness when we find our service. If we find a purpose, like living a purposeful life. And it doesn't have to be grand. Your purpose can be, growing a beautiful garden that your neighbors drive by. I'm not saying that's not grand.
Sure.
I'm just saying that sometimes people look at that as not being grand. I think that's grand when I drive by people's yards and their yards are beautiful. The way that impacts me to bring joy into my world. So that person is living a purposeful life. So I think that has a lot to do, but it's a practice, and I really, as I said, the last 3 years when I was in recovery, I'll always be the rest of my life in recovery from the loss of my son and my grandson, my only son and my only grandson, and my mom, all at the same time. I really had the opportunity to put into practice, like, I did not want to be a depressed person. I could easily have been depressed.
Yeah.
I did not want to live my life in sadness. I'm always sad, but I also wanted to lift it up and to let the light shine on that sadness. So it's just a practice of how to do that. And a lot of it is, I think, is through kindness. People's kindness to one another allows me to be kind back. So practicing kindness is really good. Practicing joy is really good. Being grateful for everything that we have is good. I don't know if I'm making sense.
You
I'm kind
are.
of babbling.
You are. I love that. I love that you're emphasizing that it's a practice.
It's a practice.
You know,
yeah.
like
It
it's
really
not.
is.
You're just not innately gifted with. Oh, I'm Rosemary Gladstar. I'm just this delightful person. That you every day practice it and you get better at it, and then you were able to build that resilience for when you do go through the hard times, which I'm very sorry for all that you've been through,
Yeah.
and then you've been able to just navigate and lift other people up and show them your love and everything. And me and my daughter do a practice every night. It's called Grateful For, which is just happens to be 4 things we're grateful for, because we used to do 3 things we're grateful for. But we found ourselves, we'd always start it with, I'm grateful for you. So then we had add like 3 more. Now it's you and Amanda. We say Amanda.
I love that.
So every night we're trying to practice our gratitude. And I do feel like at the end of the day, it's nice to kind of remind ourselves that there is so much to be grateful for, even though the world is incredibly difficult at times. So
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think about this too, when I'm with a group of friends and all we're doing is grumbling about everything, and I find this agitation start in
Yeah.
me, My husband will do that
Sure.
a lot. He agitates me, no. He'll listen to the news and then he gets very agitated, and then I get agitated, not at him, and then I feel how that feels to me. You
Sure.
just sit and think, how does that feel? And it feels exactly like how I don't want to feel.
Yeah.
So I want to be conscious of what's going on in the world, but I also want to. There is so much to be, if we're alive, even just that is something to be grateful for, right? Every day that we have. So I can always give thanks that I have one more day to be alive on this planet, this incredibly gorgeous place. What an honor, what an honor to be alive at this time when there's so much work to be done that all of us can be useful.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I kind of want to just end on just what's next for Rosemary. Any upcoming goals? Are you just excited to chill and hang out in the garden, or?
Well, I am really excited about the voices of the Herbal Elders. I'm especially excited because I want to catch some of these stories before this wave of elders, because I really had wanted to start this project way back in the early 1990s with Juliet and with Dr. Christopher and these and all of that first list. I shared that I had this whole list and they're all gone.
Yeah.
So, and now people who are my age, 70 and 80, are also passing on. So I want to just get these stories and archive them so they're available, as inspiration and storytelling and hope, and also some really good information in there. But the other thing I'm thinking about, I've been wanting to do this since I was in my 40s, right? When I was kind of, for a lot of women, when you hit your 40s, I mean, you're kind of at the height of everything, it's just such an incredible time in women's life, I found. For me, it was the best. Yeah. And so I started thinking about, I want to write this novel called Chili Verde and the Garlic Queens, story of love, passion, and herbs.
Wow.
And so it started gurgitating in my mind, and I started calling some of my women friends together, right? And the idea was, it was based on a composite of, so it would be 4 women herbalists, and I was using a lot of these women that I knew, and it was their search for the perfect green man, like you, Mason, right? their hope for this perfect green man, right?
Yeah.
Sensitive and loved the earth and did good things on the planet and sang and was romantic and also manly, right? All those things. And so it's the stories of their love lives and also their work with herbs and all of that. And I wanted to make it a little juicy too, like the Garlic Queens, right?
Oh,
so I thought, so part of us coming together is Garlic Queens. So we have 2 Society of Garlic Queens. They're sort of the secret societies, an East Coast and a West Coast. We've been meeting since really for almost 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And part of it is, we have fun and we have garlic potlucks and we we just shop and we play with herbs and stuff, but we also tell our juiciest stories. And the whole premise was we could never tell those stories outside the circle. However, I could write about them in my book.
Wow. Okay.
So I've been thinking, I don't have that juice anymore, but I do have the stories. So
Sure.
maybe I'll sit down and start to write Chili Verde and the Garlic Queens. It could be such a fun story.
I was going to say it'd be your first, as far as I know, fiction book, but then again,
Yeah.
it's not really fiction because it's based on some
Yeah,
juicy stories.
But it would be just a story of herbalists and stuff. I'm happy to see that there are a lot of herb books that are being written now. There's several, and they're beautiful,
Yeah.
that are really more storytelling
Yeah.
again. You know, less, here's a,
Right.
yeah, and it's been beautiful, and they're very moving. I'm moved by them, actually. Yeah.
Does one come to mind that maybe we could...
Well, there's Isa Schuller's book, which is, do you remember the title?
Oh, yeah.
it's
I didn't know that she wrote a fiction book. Okay.
It's not a fiction,
Okay.
no, but it's
storytelling.
It's story.
Gotcha.
It's really about the story of her life and
Okay.
the plants, and there's a lot of information about the plants in it, but
Yeah.
it's wrapped around her life and when she made this big move. So they're not necessarily fiction stories,
Gotcha.
but they're not like the classic. You open up an herb book and you're
Right.
looking at recipes for colds and all that.
I'm actually interviewing her next week. So,
Oh, awesome. Yeah. She's a
via
brilliant
Zoom, but still,
writer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm excited to hear more episodes of Voices of Our Herbal Elders.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very exciting project, a great idea, and I'm glad you got it rolling, and yeah, such a good call, and excited for the juicy book coming out.
I don't know.
here.
That book may just be one of my
Sure,
dream books.
sure,
you know?
totally.
It may be for the next life. The
There
next
you go.
round.
All right.
Or it may be just something that's passed on to one of the brilliant young herbalists who are coming up. They
Love
might
that.
write that book.
I love it.
So, yeah.
Thanks so much for being on the
Oh,
show.
thank you, Mason.
Yeah.
I love you so much.
I love you
and
too.
So nice to meet Amanda. Yeah. Thank you for the good work you're doing in the
Appreciate
world.
that.
And thank you, everyone, for listening in. Yeah.
Love it. See you in the next episode. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Herb Rally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at Herb Rally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from Herb Rally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.